Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the A Cup with Joe podcast. I'm your host, Attorney Joseph Wilson, and we have a very, very special guest on the show this morning, my good friend, Kirk Brown. Good morning, man.
Good morning, Joe. What's going on, man? How you feeling?
I'm feeling good, man. And just first of all, again, a good morning to you and a quick cheers to you.
Cheers.
Yes, sir. How you been?
I'm good. You see, I got my world's best dad mug here because, enjoying fatherhood.
Yes, sir. I'm going to have to disagree with you on that because my sons, they would say something differently about that, but you are a great father for sure.
Appreciate it, bro.
Yeah, man. So we're going to be discussing a very important topic today. But before we get into that, we've been knowing each other for a long time. I mean, how long has it been? Has it been about 8 years now?
Something like that, yeah. From we got a chance to get connected through the Emerging 100 organization that I helped to co-found and one that we're both members of.
Absolutely.
I think it's been about 8 years now.
Yeah, you've been a great friend throughout that, man. And obviously, we moved on up to the 100 Black Men of Atlanta and going to be doing a lot of great work in the community with them.
Yes, sir.
But before we get into our topic, which is discussing Black education in America, I want you to give our listeners and our viewers a little bit about background about what you do every day in your career.
Yep. So I am the Chief Development and Communications Officer for the Ron Clark Academy, internationally acclaimed middle school here in Atlanta, Georgia, 4th through 8th grade, where we are all about passion, innovation, and education for our students. And they all go off and do incredible work. But what really makes our school unique is that we are also an educator training facility. So every week, well, not right now because of COVID,
right,
we train educators from across the country and around the world. They come to RCA, they sit in our classes, they go to different classes, watch our teachers teach, and then take all of our methods that they've learned back to their schools all across the country and around the world. So that's who we are. And I get the chance of, raising the funds. We are a nonprofit. And so I get to build relationships in the community, tell our story, and get stakeholders to invest in the mission so that we can continue to do the great work that we do here.
Awesome. What do you think makes RCA so special? I mean, we can all see it from afar that school is just different than other schools, but what do you think makes it so special?
Yeah, it's passion. I mean, we're like our big thing here. A lot of times when you go to in classes, if you think about your own education, sometimes you can remember just being bored, like sitting in classes, like, why am I here? And like we've taken education and really made it something where kids are excited about coming to learn here. It's a lot of fun, but not only is it fun, but it's really, really hard. And so we challenge our kids to exceed beyond their wildest dreams, beyond their expectations. We have high expectations for our kids, but we balance it with that energy, that passion, and joy for learning. And so I think that's what makes our kids unique, because anytime you interact with any students from RCA, you can see that they have been groomed, that they're polished, because we're pushing them to be the next leaders, in our country and around the world. So I think the passion mixed with that love and energy here at RCA is what makes us unique.
Right. And specifically for you, Kirk, like what made you want to get into education? Like, something just kind of click one day for you?
So I wouldn't say I wanted to get into education, Joe, because I was in nonprofit, worked for United Way of Greater Atlanta prior to. So I was in the community and doing the work around philanthropy and building relationships and fundraising there. And education's always been a passion of mine. Like of course, the Emerging 100, we mentor students at Best Academy. I was a founding board member for the Harvard Diversity Project. That's education. So education is my passion. I just never thought I would be working in education in a school, but you just never know how your life ends up sometimes. And so, the opportunity afforded itself for me to come over and take this position. And so I took a look at it and fell in love immediately. And so I've been here ever since. It's been 8 years now since I've been here at RCA, and I wouldn't change it for the world. Education is something that I'm passionate about. I love it. I can see. I know the impact when kids are afforded the opportunity to have education, what it can do for not only for their life, but for their entire family's life. And so I'm passionate about it.
Very dope, man. All right, well, let's transition into the meat of this conversation, which is about specifically the education of Black students in America.
Yeah.
and we're going to have this conversation. There'll be some back and forth. Obviously, I'm going to give my thoughts, but based on your experience in, working with and having teachers come into RCA from all across the country to get training, would you say in 2021, do Black children receive the same level of education as their white counterparts, generally speaking, in America?
Generally speaking, I think everyone could agree, and we could all agree that no, Black kids don't receive the same education as their white counterparts. And, especially this summer when, after the killing of George Floyd, and we were having calls around the country for, social justice and racial equity, education is a huge part of that. And we have been saying for years and years and years that our kids aren't being given the same resources, aren't being given access to education. And so when you look at just the different school districts and the resources that they have, because it's, the resources that they're getting from taxes and so forth, our kids just don't have the same leg up. They don't have the same opportunities as their white counterparts. Is it okay? No. And can we change it? Yes. And so it takes conversations like this. It takes policy. It takes people being serious about actually wanting to make a change so that our kids aren't being left behind. Our kids aren't, getting the short end of the stick, if you will. So in short, no. But we definitely got to keep having these conversations, man, and talking about it for sure.
And I guess what's so frustrating for me is that this is not a new issue.
Right.
Our parents had to deal with this. We had, obviously, in the South and in the North as well, segregation, forced busing, all of these issues. I mean, it's clear that the quality of our education, generally speaking, is way under par compared to our white counterparts. Is it just that the majority of the population just doesn't care, or it's just, I just don't know how to figure that one out. It's like, we're just kind of left behind.
I mean, it goes back to the systems that are just put in place by white supremacy. I mean, right? I mean, these are constructs that we are having to continually fight every single day to dismantle. And we keep saying, like, let's dismantle the system, and no one is hearing us. And so I think finally we're having conversations now where people are finally trying to make some changes. But it's like a ship. It's not going to happen, in an instant. It's going to be a slow turn, but we've got to continue to make sure that we're applying that pressure so that we can actually see the change, because we're saying these things year and year after year, and nothing is getting done.
Right. And that's what I respect so much about Ron Clark at RCA. Obviously, he's a white man, but he speaks out so candidly on these issues, head on.
Yep.
And addresses them directly. So there's no middle ground. We know what the issue is, and we're going to speak directly to it, and that it's unfair, and we want to address it. And so I really applaud you guys for being so candid and speaking so directly about these issues.
Yeah, I mean, Ron Clark and Ken Bearden, our co-founders, white men and white women, but they understand the responsibility that they have by educating Black students to let them know the realities that are in America, and letting them know that there are injustices and that they too see them, and that them as white people, how they're helping to make a change, and how they're going to empower them to be the change that they want to see as well, and using their voice and their platform that they have to help educate other white folks and people who just haven't been able to hear those messages. And so you're right. I applaud them. I am proud to work for them and to call them my friends, because when we talk about allies, they're definitely the living and breathing examples of that.
And it's so important to have those allies speaking out as well.
Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned the lack of resources and opportunities that some districts or jurisdictions have that typically are predominantly Black. Can you explain to us, like, what does that look like as compared to, let's say, North Fulton or Alpharetta, where they have unlimited resources, compared to such as a place like South Atlanta High School? Like, what does that look like? What does that disparity look like practically?
Yeah, well, in terms of, just on the surface level, facilities, right? Because schools get resources based on, of course, the tax dollars. And so from your homes, from the businesses that are in the area. And so if you don't have those, that revenue stream from different sources, then the schools aren't going to get that trickle down, revenue to support students and support their facilities. And so you'll see on one hand a school with college-like campuses and resources sort of on say the north end, and then you go to sort of South Atlanta where there aren't as many businesses or value or home values. And so you see a little bit less, right? You see sometimes dilapidated school buildings, or you don't see teachers who have the same sort of background sometimes because they aren't able to get the competitive pay. And so it shows up in many different ways, which shouldn't be the case, right? How do we ensure that no matter where you live, that you're still getting the same access to resources, and you're still getting the teachers who care about you just the same as they would if they were on the north end? And so there's many different ways that shows up, which shouldn't be the case.
Well, the more you talk about it, the more complicated it seems, because you're right. It's not just the education itself; it's the lack of access to capital. It's an economic issue because there are less businesses in those communities, because there are Black people in those communities who try to get loans and want to open a business. They can't get them. Where their white counterparts who are similarly situated, maybe have a little bit better credit or something, they're able to get that funding to start their business. So it's a much even bigger issue than sometimes people realize.
Yeah, it's so interwoven. It's like you said, it shows up in different ways that you wouldn't even think about on the surface level. But if you start to peel back the layers, you'll see, how intricate it is and how messed up it really is. And our kids end up getting the short end of the stick at the end of the day.
Kirk, can you speak more about, because you mentioned the background of some of the teachers, and growing up, we've had good teachers, we've had bad teachers who just didn't have the patience for the job. It was clear they didn't really want to be there, and it showed. Like, how does that manifest itself with these children as well, particularly our Black kids?
Well, yeah, so I think when you look at sometimes schools who have those teachers, it's, when you're a school leader and administrator, you want to hire the best of the best. But sometimes if you don't have those resources to hire the best of the best, then you have a teacher who, may have just applied for a position just because, they weren't able to get something else. And so they show up in classes and they hand out worksheets, right? And so they're not teaching, they're not engaging their students. They hand out worksheets, and so the kids are sitting there doing worksheets all day. The teacher is sitting behind the desk, shopping or doing something, besides sort of engaging and up and about and having kids really dissect information and having those conversations and really, elevating their level of thinking. And so it shows up in that way as well, unfortunately. But I think when you, again, are given those resources and you can really make school an exciting place, that starts with the educators. It starts with the people that you have in the building, because once you have a building that is built on a culture of just passion, energy, excitement, teachers that really care about the students, that's where you're really going to find success with the kids.
And it's funny because on the lead Atlanta application, I talked about this issue and how to address it. And kind of one of my thoughts were, and I don't even know if this could happen, is, let's say for the city of Atlanta, basically the teachers would have to rotate every 3 years. So that way all the quote unquote not as qualified teachers aren't in certain districts or jurisdictions. And it's kind of rotating so that, some of the great teachers are teaching at some of the poor schools and vice versa. Is that a practical way to try to address this? I know we talked also about paying teachers more, but, I don't know how practical that is too.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, because I wonder, I think it would definitely take, before doing that, some anti-bias training, right? Because it's conversation that we're having all the time. For example, if you have a white teacher who is teaching in an underserved community and they haven't had that anti-bias training, and then you go to the school and you may have a student who is acting out, and then you're sending them to the principal's office or suspending them.
Right.
Whereas that situation might be, that situation may play out differently in a different area, because you're viewing that student as less of a threat, right? And so how do you have anti-bias training before you do that, so that they know how to de-escalate situations, how to build relationships with their kids, and so that they are able to be an advocate for their kids instead of, policing them and giving them, harsher sentences, if you will, for smaller infractions. So it's an interesting concept. I don't know if that's the answer, but if that were something that would, happen, I would say that we would definitely need some training, some intense training before that rolled out.
So Kirk Brown's shooting down my idea. I got it. So I
don't know, bro. I mean, it's interesting. I would definitely like to explore that more and see how that would look like. I mean, I'm thinking about Teach for America, and they don't sort of rotate around different schools, but that's an organization that
right.
you are able to do a stint in different school districts and things like that. So there's elements I'm sure that would work out.
Okay. I'll take that.
Yeah.
All right. I want to ask you a little bit about what the kids are actually learning at most of these schools, specifically when we're talking about history.
Mm-hmm.
So growing up, and as I'm older now, looking back, I'm realizing we didn't tell the truth when it comes to the history of America, as well as world history. And because, this is a society that is majority white, I feel like the history was taught and that's continuing to be taught is to really make white people feel good. And our history is pretty much relegated to, slavery and maybe a few inventors here and there, civil rights movement and all that strife, but not our entire history and all of the things that Black people and people of African descent have contributed to the world.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that, and how do we address that? Do we need to rip up the history books and rewrite them, or what do we need to do?
Yeah, we definitely need to rip up the history books. I mean, as we all know, if you have a history book and you flip through, it's a white man, and you flip through some more pages, is another white man, as you mentioned. And like you said, we're relegated to sort of, the slave trade. And yes, that is a part of our history, but really do textbooks go beyond, the slave trade, which they need to, as you mentioned. Black kids, and not just Black kids, but white kids, need to understand the impact that we have had on this world even before the slave trade began, right? And understanding that, the Mali Empire, large region in West Africa, one of the richest places, right, in the world in the 14th century. So how do we teach that? Mansa Musa. How do we teach that to let our Black kids know that they come from a wealthy people? And so, yeah, it's history like that that's not being taught because we're relegated to slavery and the slave trade. But it's so much more beyond that, right? We come from a powerful people. We've contributed to this country for many years. As you mentioned, the civil rights movement. There's so many pieces that history leaves out. But we have the responsibility to recognize it as educators, and then to, fill in the gaps where it's not being taught. And so I know here at RCA, that is something that we are very intentional about doing, teaching our kids that, because when you realize that you come from a powerful people, then you walk differently, right? You walk with your head up, you walk with your shoulders back, and you have a different swag about yourself. And so we need to be able to empower our kids and build in them the confidence that they're not relegated to slavery. Yes, we are resilient people. We overcame that, but we're much more than that.
And you mentioned one of my favorite people in history, Mansa Musa, who is regarded as the richest person in history. And this was a Black man. Yep. But if you say that to a lot of these Black kids or even some white kids, they'll say, who is that? You no clue who he is, because we don't teach it. We basically, all of the major accomplishments of Black people all over the world, they're either not mentioned or they're stolen. And it's pretty frustrating.
It definitely is. It's history that gets whitewashed. It's pushed under the rug. But we've got to be more intentional about teaching that. And so at RCA, we use our platform to let educators know, white educators, Black educators, everyone, that this is history that's not being taught, and we need to infuse it in our history. And here's how you do that. Here's how you decolonize your classroom. Here's how you decolonize your school. How do you be a culturally responsive school? How do you teach this history so that we are not leaving it out because it's not in history books? This is we got to be intentional about the pieces of history, of Black history, and infusing that in our everyday lessons.
And kind of along those lines, and I don't know if this is practical or not, but should there for certain topics, should there just be a national standard where, okay, this needs to be taught? This type of history regarding Black people has to be taught to all students, because we have folks like Brian Stevenson, who's the executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative, talking about how we've never really reconciled and taught the truth in our schools, and because of that, we continue to have this issue with white supremacy in this country in 2021, and that's evident as to what happened at the Capitol a couple of weeks ago. But is that practical as well, a national standard?
I think so. I mean, we have a national standard for everything else, so why can't we include, the American there so integral into the history of this country? And so, if we're able to learn, all the presidents and to learn all the regions and everything else that is contributed, that white America contributes to this country, we are very much so a part of this country as well. Why can't it be a national standard to learn and to study and to understand the contributions that Black America made to this country? I think it's a simple answer. Yes, let's make it happen. All right. So who are the authors of these textbooks? Who are the companies that produce these textbooks? Let's have a conversation about making that happen.
Got a lot of work to do.
Yes, sir. For sure.
But one thing you mentioned we can do, as Black parents, is even if it's not being taught at school, we've got to teach it at home. We cannot just leave it up to the schools to educate our children about ourselves. A knowledge of self is very important, and it's on the parents as well. We've got to step up and take responsibility and teach our kids who they are as well.
Yeah, and it's very simple, like how you start that. I mean, it's even with the books that you bring into your home, right? I mean, you have little ones. I've got a little girl. What are the books that we have on their bookshelf that we can teach them and engage with them from a young age so that they continue to learn that history? And it's not something that, what you just said, where they're waiting until they get to high school or to college sometimes to even learn that history. What can we do as parents now to build in them and to build up that history and that the confidence in them about their history?
Wrapping up, I did have a few more questions. I want to talk a little bit about science and math, because that seems to be, on a global perspective, technology, science, math, we're behind compared to other countries. I mean, we're falling further and further behind. And I know RCA is doing a great job with that, but most schools are not. So what are ways that we can help our children not fall behind so much in science and math, again, which appear to be the future sectors in the world?
Yeah, I think it's being intentional about having that STEM curriculum in classes, having an intentional focus on providing opportunities for our kids to be exposed to that. Exposure is the huge piece here, right? Because if you don't know that this is the opportunity for you to engage with in STEM fields or in STEM job opportunities, then you won't know that it's something for you to consider. So how do we introduce coding? How do we introduce, the mathematical concepts behind, careers that they are interested in, right? How do we break down the different pieces of STEM and be intentional about showing that? How do robots work, right? What are the intricate details around that? And so I love what the 100 Black Men is doing, with the robotics program, because again, that is infusing our kids, giving them the opportunity, the access to learn and to be hands-on in the STEM field, because now they can use those same concepts and be potential engineers if they would like to, right? And be running corporations that are really focused around STEM. At RCA, we have, classes, our math classes, our science classes are all about hands-on and learn the intricate details of that. We've got a robotics program as well. And so how do we be intentional about having those programs, our classes being infused around STEM, so that kids know that that's an opportunity for them? They get comfortable with that, and they have conversation and really know the dialogue and the concepts around it. So it's an intentionality that's required.
Awesome, man. I want to circle back to something you said earlier about what RCA does as far as building up the mindset of the children at that school. Because again, they all seem to end up at these great high schools, these top colleges, and just doing extraordinary things in their lives. So can you kind of dig a little deeper on, what that secret sauce looks like that RCA is doing to produce these great kids?
Yeah. Well, Joe, one of our pillars here at RCA is climate and culture. We're huge about the culture here at RCA. We're a huge family. And so even before the kids come to RCA, we visit the home of every single child. We sit down with them and welcome them and let them know that we're here as a resource. And that continues even when they enter the doors, right? And so they know that we're here as a mentor, as an advocate for them. And so that's number one. And then we continue to push them and give them opportunities to excel, to use their voice, and to let them know that what they have to say and that their thoughts matter. And we empower them and encourage them to be able to, it's okay to think and have a unique thought and to be able to voice that and have conversations. And so they walk around with this, this feeling like, I matter, my voice matters, and I have something to say. And so that sort of, mindset trickles, and I feel like they walk around with a halo on them. So when schools are looking for, students to, attend these top colleges, these top high schools around the country, they look to RCA because they know that we are grooming world leaders. And so I think it's again with that culture, how we, welcome them in and continue to be that support system around them and to empower them to know that their voice matters. With our lessons, with the opportunities that they have, access is everything. And we're huge about showing them, what they can be here at RCA and in the world. So that's the secret sauce, and letting them know to walk around this world and be confident in skin, to use passion and energy, and, any opportunity that they see, they can definitely achieve if they put their mind to it.
Awesome. And I guess my last question would be, because obviously in some of these public schools, there are 2,000 kids, some have 3,000 kids. Is it really possible to implement this across that type of mindset, that type of teaching across the nation in some of these public schools? Or is it just, they're too big, it's just not enough teachers to do it?
No, it definitely can be implemented. And we've seen the results of our program, being implemented across the country. And the majority of schools that come to us for training are public schools, and they report back and we see the impact that is happening across the country, right? So we always say you don't have to have a slide. Like you've gone on our slide, we got a 2-story view slide. You don't have to have a slide or a dragon skeleton in your school to have success, but it's all about what are the relationships that you're doing? Can you really be intentional about building true relationships with your students, right? Being a support system in your class, giving kids the opportunities to use their voice. What are the things that you're doing? Can you smile more in class? Can you be engaging, right? How do you make school fun for your students? Be intentional about teaching them those skills about, giving a firm handshake and looking folks in the eye and really engaging people, how to be a good conversationalist. Those skills that aren't being taught are the things that we do here at RCA and that we show educators. How do you make that happen in your school? And really, if you start with those things, you'll be so surprised, the opportunities that you have with the culture in your school for it to grow and really to be transformative. And so can it be implemented in public schools? Yes. And it definitely is happening and having an impact around the country. So that's a beautiful thing here. And I can't wait, man, until, we get a handle on this whole COVID thing and we can have educators come back in. We've been doing virtual trainings and things now to really continue the message and continue to impact schools across the country, but can't wait to have them back in the building.
Very dope, man. And for all our listeners and viewers out there, if you, once COVID is over, get a chance to visit RCA, it's an incredible experience. Like Kirk said, the kids just, they look different, they act differently. They're so polished and they're so young, and you're just like, wow, like I can't believe they act like that and they're 8, 9, 10 years old. It's crazy. Yeah. Just a reminder, Kirk, once my boys are of age, let's have that conversation.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you always coming to RCA and volunteering whenever I call on you for the amazing shake and anything else, man. So the love is there, so I appreciate that.
No doubt, man. Tell the folks how they can get in touch with you.
Yep. So you can follow me on Instagram. My handle is there. It's Kirk Andre on Instagram, on all platforms, Twitter, Facebook, on LinkedIn as well. And so I love to connect with you guys and continue the conversation and be a resource and help in any way that I can.
All right, man. We appreciate you being on, Kirk. To our viewers and listeners, thank you for tuning in to the A Cup with Joe podcast. We really are excited about having these important conversations and can't wait to the next episode. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Joe.